Probably the second most common thing that we do with applications, other than saving a file, is to actually print a file. So let's start with the basic question, what is a printer? Well, going back to our basic concepts, a printer, of course, is a piece of hardware, and it's also an output device. It's how we get information out of the computer into a hard copy that we can have. Now, a hard copy simply means it's printed on usually paper. There's all kinds of different paper stock, and we're not going to get into that now. But creating a hard copy version of a file is something that people still want to do a lot of. Each printer, again, can be very different, including having special output features. Here are some examples of some printing devices, and again, they come in many different shapes and sizes. On the top left, we have something that really is hard to find anymore, except in special businesses that need them, and that's a dot matrix printer. If you've ever heard a dot matrix printer, you know it's a very unique sound. And it's something that we heard a lot of, probably 15 to 20 years ago. But these days, inkjet and laserjet printers have replaced them. The reason we still like dot matrix printers is because they're called an impact printer, meaning it physically hits the paper. That's what's important if you have to have carbon copies. So many businesses that have to have carbon copies, like for statements and invoices, still use a dot matrix printer. In the middle of the top row, we have an inkjet. Inkjets are probably the most popular for consumer printers because they're fairly inexpensive. You buy little cartridges of ink, anywhere from 3 to 5 colors, and the printer goes ahead and makes a very good quality. In fact, it can even be photo quality reproduction using an inkjet printer. You do have to be a little careful because depending on what kind of ink you have, sometimes they're not water resistant. So if you spill something on it, it actually can smear. But the inks these days are getting much, much better. The monster on the top right and the one on the bottom left are actually examples of laser jets. We hear about a lot of these in business because they're fast, they're fairly inexpensive, and they have very high quality output. Laser printers can be either monochrome or black and white or color. These days, color laser jets are becoming more popular and to print color is becoming less expensive. But still, printing in color is usually more expensive than printing in black and white. A couple of special printers that we have are on the bottom right side. The one in the middle is a multifunction printer. This one not only prints, but it also will scan and possibly even fax and make copies. These also are becoming very popular, especially in home offices and small offices, because you get 3 or 4 machines in one. And the last one on the right is a large format printer, something that could be used by architects or people who do graphic design and need to print out banners and posters. It's kind of hard to see from this picture, but actually this is roughly about 4 to 5 feet wide. That's definitely a lot larger than these others, most of which will sit right on a desktop. We've mentioned some of these printing devices, or at least shown you some pictures of them, so now let's discuss them a little bit more. There are, of course, many, many different types, brands, and models of printers. Entry level to very high end. A printer can be as inexpensive as $30, or as much as multiples of thousands of dollars, even $9,000 to $10,000, so really a big range. Common consumer type printers include the dot matrix, not so much anymore like we already mentioned, but primarily these days inkjet and laser. You also see some that are specifically labeled as photo printers. They're intended to work very well with full color photographs for printing out your snapshots and things like that. We also have those multifunction machines that we talked about. Not only do we have inkjet and laser, but sometimes we have other types of things that we can use as well. For example, the Xerox company has kind of a waxy thing. It's almost like a crayon that they use instead of regular ink or toner used in a laser jet. And sometimes for special things, you may also see something called a dye printer. So all different kinds of things to actually get the color on the page, but they all kind of fall into these categories. For general consumer printers, inkjet, laser, photo, and multifunction are the 4 categories that you'll be most interested in. Printers vary widely in their price, and often their price is related to their features. Some of the most specific features that you'll want to think about are, do they have more than one paper or output tray? Since I do a lot of printing of courseware, I need to have more than one output tray. That way I can keep glossy stock in one and regular stock in another. In a business, you may have letterhead in one tray and second sheets in another, or maybe even envelopes in a third. so the number of paper trays that you have can be important. Otherwise, you have to switch the trays in and out or switch the paper in and out. One of my favorite features is called duplexing. This feature means the printer can print on both sides of the paper without you having to touch it. It's kind of fun to watch. It basically kind of almost spits out a page and then it sucks it back up and prints on the other side, flipping it over internally. It's kind of fun. If you need to print things that are going to be bound or they need to be double-sided, this is almost an indispensable feature. And then lastly, we also have networked printers. I need to have a networked printer because I don't want to purchase a printer for every person that works in my office. By buying one or two printers that sit on the network, they all can be shared by multiple people. Lastly, we have that multifunction machine, and just as review, the basic features that we find there is the ability to scan and copy as well as fax in addition to doing regular printing. You'll find printers with all of these different combinations and more, so just be careful to read the features that are offered with your printer as well as the type of printer that it is. Well, since printers are hardware, we know that it has to be connected somehow to the CPU. And this really isn't much different than mice and keyboards and some of the things that we've talked about. You can have wired printers that are going to be wired either to the printer port or to the USB port. We can also have wireless, which includes Bluetooth, that's going to have some type of receiver, usually attached to a USB port, but again, Bluetooth printers may have some of that embedded into the CPU, like it does in a laptop. When it comes to network printers, we actually have a couple of options. A network printer can technically be made available through other computers. For example, if you're sitting at home and you have two computers, one for you and one for the kids, you may not want to purchase two printers. You may physically connect a printer to your computer. That's known as a local printer, and it's going to use that wired technology we already mentioned. But if your kids want to print, and if you have a network at home, they may be able to access the printer connected to your computer by going through your computer. It's not physically connected to their computer, but it is physically connected to yours. Now I mentioned that one because that's different than a truly networked computer. A truly networked computer is standalone. It's not connected to a CPU anywhere. It has its own connection to the computer network, and it doesn't require itself to be connected to any other computers. This is what you find in most businesses. The reason this is important is because with the first one, if you turn off your computer as the parent, then that printer is no longer available to your kids. With a truly networked printer, it doesn't matter which computers are turned on or off. Any of the computers on the network will be able to print to the network printer. One of the newest types of printer connectivities that we're seeing now is something called an internet-based printer. Now again, I won't go into all of the details here, but really all it requires is an internet connection. So if you have a small office with 10 people, you have a printer sitting in that office that has a connection to the network. It's really a special form of networking. But instead of going through the network, anybody with a browser can open up the internet, go to a special address, and send a print job. Now it may be difficult to see why that's important, because if you're all in the office, it's just the same as a network printer. But what an internet-enabled printer allows me to do is it allows me to send a print job to my office in Boise, Idaho, even if I happen to be sitting back in Washington, D.C. As long as I have an internet connection, I can send things to the printer. Now that kind of brings in this whole new cool possibility of being able to print from thousands of miles away. So when we get past the hardware, how do we actually print a file? Well, first you have to either select or open the file. Then you're going to click the printer button on the toolbar, or you can use the print menu command, usually from the file menu, such as File Print, or if you're working with Office 2007 or Office 2010, you can choose Print from the Office button, or the universal keyboard shortcut for printing is always Control-P, P for print. Once you do one of those things, you're going to see the print dialog box. From the print dialog box, you might choose to adjust the actual printer you're printing to. For example, in an office, you may have 2 or 3 printers from which you can choose. You can set the number of copies. If you're printing multiple copies of a multi-page document, you can choose whether you want those to be collated. In other words, is it going to print 111, 222, 333? Or is it going to print 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3? So when you take it out of the paper tray, they're already put together and all you have to do is separate each set instead of manually collating them. You will then have a variety of other printer-specific properties like duplexing that you can set up, depending on the actual printer. But choosing the printer, the number of copies, and collation are the three things that you'll probably do most often when you print. Before we can actually print something, though, we have to make sure that we have printers installed. Remember that printers are pieces of hardware, and until the computer recognizes that hardware exists, you can't send something to a printer that doesn't exist. So let's take a look at how we can see what our system printers are and if they are available. Now, once again, there's going to be a couple of different ways to do this, but from any of your operating systems, you're going to go to the Start button. If you're using Windows XP, you want to go to Control Panel and double-click the Printers option. In Windows Vista or Windows 7, we can simply type Printers. Now, they have changed this a little bit even between Windows Vista and Windows 7. In Windows 7, they have a new window called Devices and Printers that combines both printers with other pieces of hardware. In Windows XP and in Windows Vista, you will simply have a Printers window that only shows you printers. I'm going to go ahead and press Enter to show my Devices and Printers window. And that allows us to very easily see all of the hardware that's connected to this particular computer. At the top, we can see that there are certain devices. Now, we're not worried about external devices, but they do include things like external hard drives, USB disks, and even my monitor. Instead, we want to come down to the section that says Printers and Faxes, and it nicely tells us that currently there are 4 installed to this computer. One thing I want to mention is that having a printer installed does not necessarily mean it's physically connected to your computer. For example, I can have a fax machine that I use at home, and I also may have another printer called HP Color LaserJet that are part of my home office. And then when I go to my regular office, that's where I may have these other printers, including an HP Color LaserJet 2800 Series PS. The Microsoft XPS document writer is actually known as a system printer. It's something that my software uses to do special output. Again, that's a topic for different discussions. What we need to know here, though, is that even though I'm seeing 4 printers listed, it doesn't necessarily mean that I have 4 printers physically attached to my computer right now. With that said, the one thing that I can do is also take a look for the check mark. The check mark tells me which one of these printers is set as the default. The default printer means that when I click on the print option using any variety of methods, then this is going to be the one that it chooses first. Now, I will always have the opportunity to choose another one, but by setting your default printer appropriately, it saves you one step in the print process. Right now, we can see that the HP Color Laser is set as the default printer. If I wanted to change that, I could simply right-click on any one of my other printers and choose Set as Default Printer. You can see that it may take just a few seconds, but then the check mark is applied to that printer instead. I'm going to put that back, just so you can see it again, to my HP Color LaserJet by right-clicking and choosing Set as Default. The default printer is probably one of the most important settings once you have a printer installed, but there are also other settings, and to get to those, I'm going to double-click the printer. In Windows 7, this opens up a window that actually gives me a lot of different options as well as some information. In prior versions of Windows, you'll probably just see a simple window that we'll get to in just a second. In Windows 7, I actually can see a lot of really useful information here. At the top of the screen, it actually gives me the name of the printer, HP Color Laser. It tells me what the type of printer is. Now, the reason for that is when you install the printer, you can create a short name, which is HP Color LaserJet. The actual name of the printer and the driver or the software that makes it work is HP Color LaserJet 2605, 2605DN, 2605DTN PS. That definitely is too long, which is why you're allowed to create an alias or a second name for it. Below the physical printer description, I can also see that currently there are 0 documents in the queue, meaning there's nothing waiting to be printed, that the printer is ready to use, and that it's currently set for letter-size paper in a portrait orientation. Now, all of those things are the defaults, and that's what I want to work with. So the next thing I'm going to do is double-click on Adjust Print Options. This will adjust the default for the printer. Depending on which printer you're looking at, this box will look very different because all of your printers have different options from different manufacturers. I'm not going to talk about all of these features. That's something that you can take a look at or go through your user guide. But a couple of things that we want to take a look at include the size of the paper. By default, I work on letter size or 8.5 by 11 paper. If I worked in a legal firm, or if I worked for maybe an engineering company that used larger paper, I could choose all kinds of different paper sizes that would become the default. I'm going to leave this as letter. I also could choose which tray, if I have multiple paper trays on my printer, that I want it to come from. So I could say I always want it to come from the manual feed, or from tray 1, tray 2, tray 3, and so forth. Remember, here we're only setting the defaults, and I actually can override all of this with each individual print job that I send. The other option that I really like in this particular printer is on the Finishing tab. If I click Finishing at the top, this is where I can choose to make the default be duplex printing. In other words, by default, print on both sides of the page. As you look through this particular screen, you'll see that there are certain options, but duplexing is not one of them. Here's a little hint for you. First of all, not all printers offer duplexing, but even if they do, sometimes the duplexing needs to be turned on in a different place before it becomes available in the Printing Preferences dialog. So remember that you always have the option to set your defaults. And I'm going to go ahead and cancel out so that we don't save any of these. In Windows 7, we can get to the defaults by double-clicking the printer and then double-clicking Adjust Printer Options. We also can go up and customize things like the name of the printer. So if I don't like HP Color Laser, I can adjust that. I can also set security and other properties. For now, what I want to show you, though, is a second window. And in Windows 7, we get to that by double-clicking See What's Printing. For Windows Vista and Windows XP, this is the window that you'll see when you initially double-click the printer from the printer's window. This actually isn't very interesting at the moment, but this is called the print queue. When you have multiple print jobs waiting to go to the printer, they will all be listed here. And you can see what the name of the document is, what its current status is, for example, it's printing or maybe it needs a different size of paper, who sent it to the printer, how many pages, and the size. This is really nice in an office because if you're waiting for a print job to come out and you keep walking over to the printer and yours isn't there, you can open the print queue and go, aha, that's because Susan has just sent a 59,000 page document and it's going to take 40 minutes for that to print. What I wanted to show you here, though, is not only that ultimately you'll be able to see print jobs, but also that there are a couple of menus. One about individual documents if they were in the queue, and the second about the printer as a whole. If I click the printer menu, I can change the default here, but I can also work with some different options, such as pausing the printer or canceling all of the documents that are currently in the queue. So if I had an issue, for example, if I needed to change toner or maybe I needed to add paper, I might want to simply pause the printing jobs. If I wanted to get rid of all of them, maybe I sent a bunch of stuff and then realized that I shouldn't have sent them and I don't want to print them, I can cancel those. We'll actually take a look at that in just a second. For now, I'm going to click Pause Printing. Now you'll notice in the title bar that it tells me the HP Color LaserJet printer is paused. Just want you to keep that in mind for a few minutes. And I'm going to go ahead and simply minimize this window. I'm not going to close it. I'm just going to minimize it down to the taskbar. Then I'm going to go back to my Devices and Printers window. And I'm going to do that by using the Back button on the top left of my window. Windows Vista users will also have the Back button. Windows XP users will need to use the Up button, the up one level. There we go. And now we're back to looking at our printers. The reason I brought you back here is because we don't always have a printer installed, so I wanted to show you how to install a printer. Regardless of the operating system version you have, somewhere on this window you will see an option to add a printer. Mine happens to be on the top left corner. I'll go ahead and give that a click. The first thing it needs to know is if you're trying to add a local printer, one that is physically connected to your computer, or a network, wireless, or Bluetooth printer, something that is not physically connected to your printer. I'm going to go ahead and choose Adding a Local Printer. If this is a local printer, the next thing it needs to know is how is it connected to your computer? Is it using a printer port? And you'll see from this drop down that we have many options. We could have multiple printer ports. We could have something called serial ports. We could have what's known as print to file, which is an electronic thing we're not going to talk about. We also could have some things using the network. A variety could be available. I'm simply going to stay with the good old-fashioned printer port on the back of the computer. There are ways to create a new port, but that's beyond the scope of this class. So we'll select our printer port and then click Next at the bottom right. The next step is to install the printer driver. Now remember that a printer is a piece of hardware. We're also connecting it to our CPU, which is another piece of hardware. But if you remember, we had a discussion about different languages. And even though both of these are pieces of computer equipment, and ultimately they're going to speak a similar language, getting down to that binary stuff, the fact of the matter is that the CPU, the motherboard, the processor, and the printer may speak different versions of the same language, which means they're not completely understood. We need to have kind of a mini translator in the middle, and that's what a driver does. A driver is a little piece of software that tells the hardware, in this case my computer, how to communicate with the printer. It tells it things like what features does it have and what language is it speaking. This actually is a fairly simple process. You start by choosing the manufacturer of your printer from the left-hand side. You will see as you scroll down that most of the big ones are here. I'm going to scroll back up to the top, and I'm going to choose Epson. No particular reason why, just as an example. Once you choose the manufacturer on the left, then you will see a list of appropriate printers for that vendor on the right. If you're not seeing your printer, you should click on Windows Update, and that will update the list. I'm going to scroll down here and show you that there are several different types of Epson printers. If you're not sure what kind of printer you have, walk over to it, and somewhere on the top or on the front you should see a label that actually gives you the number. I'm going to go ahead and choose a photo printer just because we don't have one yet, and I'm thinking we'll just do the Epson Stylus Photo RX620. Again, no particular reason why, I just want to install a photo printer. Once we've done that, we can click on Next. This is where we give the printer our useful friendly name, and I'm going to simplify it. I'm going to call it Epson Photo. It tells us that even though I'm giving it the shortened name, that it's going to be installed with the Epson Stylus Photo RX620M driver. This is all good. Now I'll move down and I'll click on Next. It may take a few seconds to a couple of minutes to install the printer and the driver. Then it will come up with a window asking you if you want to share this printer. That is up to you. You can either not share the printer, or you can share the printer with other people on your network. Now, if you're at home and you don't have a printer on every computer, you would want to choose Share the Printer so that other people can see it. And then you can either give it the same name, or you can give it another name. For example, I might call it Epson Photo on Aaron or something like that, so that they know that this is the one connected to my computer. You also can put in a comment that can be a little bit more detailed if you want. And if you're in a large office, you actually can put a location, that it's in conference room A or cubicle D or something like that. This is not required, and it can be changed at any time. But once you get it set the way you want, you'll again click Next. The last step is to always determine if you want to set this as the default printer, and I'm actually going to remove that check mark. I want to keep my HP as the default printer. And then normally I do recommend that you click the button that says Print a Test Page. That's how you'll be able to tell if you have set up the printer correctly. I'm not going to do that because of course you won't be able to see it happen. So I'm simply going to click Finish. Then we get to see our new printer has been added to our list, and we also can see this little icon next to it. Now the icon may differ depending on what operating system you're using, but there should be some little icon or maybe even a little hand holding a piece of paper that tells you that this is a shared printer. Now it's all ready to use. By using the Devices and Printers window, Or, for prior operating system, just the printers window, you're able to track what printers you have, change the properties of those printers, look at the print queue, as well as install new printers. Well, let's go ahead and get out of this window by moving to the upper right corner and clicking on the red X. And now let's take some time to actually print some documents. I know that I have a document sitting out in my document library, so I'm going to go ahead and access that. And there's a couple of ways to do it. I'm going to go down to my Start button, and on the right side I'm going to move up and simply click Documents. This will take me immediately to my Documents library. In Windows XP or Windows Vista, it actually will say either Documents or My Documents, but it will basically take you to the same type of place. Here I can see the document that I have created earlier in WordPad. Now I have a couple of options. First of all, I could simply right-click on a file, and I could choose Print. If I did that, I would not have any options. It would open my file, it would print one copy to the default printer with the default settings, and then it would close everything down. Now that might be perfect if I know I just want one copy using the defaults, but it doesn't give me options, and I want to show you what the options are. So I'm going to press Escape to get out of this menu, and then double-click my document to open it up in the application. When you are in an actual application, you'll either have a print button or a print option on the menu, or you can always just press Control-P, those things we talked about a few minutes ago. I'm going to move to the upper left corner of my window and click, in this case, on the drop-down for what used to be the File menu. And what I'm going to see is something that may be, again, a little bit different. In older versions of the operating system and in older versions of the software, such as Windows XP and even Windows Vista, you will see that you have the print option with a ... or an ellipsis after it. When you see anything with the dots after it, that means it's going to open a dialog box. So clicking on that will open the print dialog. With Windows 7, Office 2007, and all of the later software and operating systems, we instead get more options here, and that's why we see this little flyout. From Print, I can choose a Print Preview, which actually shows me on the screen what it's going to look like when it prints. I can choose Quick Print, which is going to be just like it would have right-clicking on the document, where it's just going to print one copy with the default settings. Or at the top, I can choose the Print command here, which is actually going to open the print dialog, and that's what I want to do. Different applications will have slightly different print dialog boxes, but the important parts are all going to be the same. First of all, at the top, you're always going to select your printer first. Mine is the HP Color Laser because that's my default. But you can see that I do have the option to scroll around left and right to see other printers, including my Epson photo printer that I installed just a moment ago. I'm going to stick with the HP Color Laser. Once you select the printer, then you might get changes and options, which is why you always want to select the printer first. We can first of all see some information. For example, that right now this printer is paused. So I know if I send this print job, it's actually not going to begin printing. Now remember, I did that on purpose, and I'll tell you why a little bit later. One thing that you need to do is determine what you want to print. Now this is a very simple document. It only has one line of text, so we don't have a lot of options. But you can choose to print all of a document. If you had selected part of the document ahead of time by clicking and dragging with your mouse, for example, then you can choose to just print that selection instead of an entire page or the entire document itself. You also can print just the current page, which is wherever your cursor is, not necessarily what you're seeing on screen, but where your cursor is located. Or you can choose to print different page ranges. Now we're going to pretend that this is a 5 or 10 page document because I want to show you how you designate this. If I wanted to print a range of pages, in other words pages 2, 3, and 4, then I can use the dash. 2-4 means to do the range of 2 to 4. If though I wanted to print the first page, not the second page, and then 3 through 5, I can use a comma. For example, 1, 3-5 is going to print page 1, then the range 3, 4, and 5. Now the reason I show you this is because I've seen way too many people doing multiple print jobs. They'll print page 1 first, and then they'll open it up and print a second one for 3 to 5, and then open it again to do 7 through 12. You do not need to do multiple print jobs. You simply need to know how to use the comma and the dash to represent all of the pages you want to print, none of the pages that you don't, and that's how you can get all of the pages that you want without doing all of them in a single print job. Probably the most common, though, is going to be to stick with printing all of your pages. It doesn't hurt, by the way, to just say, I want to print page 1. The computer's smart, and even though there is only page 1, that's okay instead of doing all pages as well. The next thing you would want to do is designate the number of copies. I'm going to pretend that I need to share this with 2 other people, so I'm going to print 3 copies. This is called a spinner box, and a spinner box can be used by either clicking the up and the down arrows or by physically clicking and typing. If I set the number of copies for more than 1 copy, that then enables the collation option. To collate is what we were talking about earlier, which is, do I want it to print all of page 1, 3 copies, and then all of page 2, or do I want it to print it in sets? It helps that it gives you a little preview. Notice when I remove the check mark, it says it's going to print 112233. That is not collated. If I put the check mark on, then it's going to print 123, 123, 123. It's not always true, but generally speaking, I think more often than not, you do want to have collation. Selecting the printer, what you want to print, the number of copies, and whether to use collation are the most common things that you'll do as part of a print job. If you need to go back and work with the properties of the printer, remember we said we wanted to use letter paper and we wanted to use the default tray and we didn't turn on duplexing? Every print dialog box has some kind of preferences button, and that will open up the same window that we saw before. So I could change those settings for this print job only. That's the difference. The first time I did it was the default for the printer as a whole. This would be changing it for this print job only. When everything's all set the way you want, all you have to do is click Print, which I'll go ahead and do now. You may have seen for just a second a little box that came up and said Printing, page 1, page 2, page 3. That's just telling you that it's processing the print job and that has now been sent to the printer. At this point, I can go ahead and close WordPad. I still have my document library open up in the background, which is I want to show you how to print a special kind of print job, and that relates to working with photos. On the left side of my screen, I have a folder for pictures. In Windows XP and Windows Vista, you should also have these. If you need to go back to my computer, you might find your pictures there instead. I'm going to simply give the picture library a click, and I can see that there is a sample pictures folder, which I am going to double click on. And it doesn't matter which one I select, but I'm simply going to click on one of these pictures. The difference between printing a document and printing pictures is documents are usually a set size. For example, I want it to print on 8.5 by 11 paper. Photos, though, are different. Photos we usually want to print at a specific size. For example, we have 4 by 6 prints, or 5 by 7s, or 8 by 10s. And we may even have special paper stock to print on those particular sizes. That's what makes them a little bit tricky. And in the old days, we had to physically open this up in some kind of a page layout program, resize it to actually make it a 5 by 7 or an 8 by 10, and then print it out from there. Fortunately, the later Windows operating systems have a very special print feature, specifically for pictures. When I select a picture, you may have noticed that near the top of this window, I now have a print button. I'm going to go ahead and click that. Unlike a typical print dialog box, Windows knows that I'm trying to print a picture. I can select my printer. Now, my HP color laser is okay for printing pictures, but remember, I actually installed a photo printer, so I'm going to select Epson Photo. I want you to watch what happens. The options change over here to the right. Based on the printer I have selected, I now can go to paper size, and instead of just letter, I can see actual picture sizes, 4 by 6, 8 by 10, and more. If I choose my HP again, just to show you how this works, you will see that it doesn't show me nice photo sizes because this is not a photo printer. This is just a regular printer, so it knows things like letter and legal and statement. That's one of the reasons having a formal photo printer will help you when you're printing pictures. No more guesswork. I don't have to get creative and do a lot of my own settings. So I'm going to use the Epson photo printer, and I'm going to print a 4x6 page. It's not text, so I want to make sure that it is a photo quality. And if I'm using special photo paper, I can actually tell it that. I can say that I'm using premium glossy photo paper. All of this has to do with how the printer is going to apply, in this case, the ink, and the quality at which it's going to do it. Now, because I have specifically selected 4x6, my only option on the right is to do a full page photo. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see that I can choose how many copies of the picture I want. And I'm going to say 3, but because this is printing on exactly the right size paper, we don't see anything change. Just because I want to show you what the different options are, I'm going to go ahead and move this back to the color laser. The color laser is an office printer, so it doesn't use 4x6 paper, it uses letter paper. I can still do best quality, I can still set a paper type, but notice with a regular office printer, my options on the right have changed. Since I'm not able to say I want a 4x6, I need to print it on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, Windows is saying, well, okay, if you're printing on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, we can fit 2 4x6 photos on that page, or 2 5x7s. Or as we continue to scroll down, we can do an 8x10, we can do 4 3x5s, or we can even do 9 wallet size. You'll notice as I click on these different options that my preview changes. Because I've chosen to print 3 copies, but because I can fit 4 3.5 by 5 copies on one 8.5 by 11 piece of letter paper, it shows that there's a blank space in the upper right. This really gives me a lot of flexibility. So I could put in some photo paper into my regular color laser, and if I had maybe a picture of my son or my family, I could actually print out my own wallet size prints simply by using the Windows operating system. I don't need any special software. I don't need to send it out to a photo lab or take it to one of those 1-hour developing centers. And I can print as many copies as I want. I think that's pretty cool. Because I do an awful lot of digital photography and I've done an awful lot of photo printing, this is probably one of the greatest features that I saw they added in the last few versions. I once again am going to go ahead and send this to print. Because they are photos, just know that the progress bar that displays while it's processing the print job and sending it to the printer might take a little bit of time, depending on the size of the original file, the size of the prints, and how many copies of each. It, once again, though, is simply going to our printer queue. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out now, and I want to show you that queue. If you go down to your taskbar, to the system tray, you may see a picture of a printer that's shown there. Remember, though, that I also minimized my print queue, so I'm simply going to bring this back up. At this point, I get to see the same thing I would have seen if I saw the printer icon in my system tray and double-clicked on it. This is my print queue, and it's telling me that I currently have 2 different documents that are waiting. They were both sent by the administrator. They're both only 1 page. I can see that my text document is very, very tiny compared to my pictures. My text document is 3.48 kilobytes. My pictures are 18 megabytes. That's significantly different. If I scroll to the right, I also can see the date and time it was submitted, some other information. At this point, if I did not want to print my document, I can select it and go to the document menu, and I can say either pause it or restart it or go ahead and cancel. And it'll come up and say, are you sure you want to cancel the document? I can say yes. And that's how you can stop a print job, even after you've sent it to the printer. If I were to go back to the printer menu, and I were to go ahead and unpause the printing, then the print queue would pick back up, and in this case it would start printing my photos. Or if I wanted to cancel everything, I could say cancel all documents. Are you sure you want to cancel all of them? I could say yes. And you'll see that it completely clears out the print queue. When I'm finished viewing this, I can simply close it. And remember, I can always get that window back by double-clicking the little printer icon in the system tray, or by going back to my Start menu and either accessing printers from the control panel or by typing in printers and using the Printers and Devices window. Well, there you go. Now you have a really good understanding of how to print using Windows. How to set up a new printer, how to set the properties and set the default printer, how to look at the print queue, and several different ways that you can send print jobs. Now you're all ready to get hard copy output from all of the files that you may be managing using your PC.